do, Connor. Probably always have. Question is, can you do it? Up until this point, I've been reviewing games in the Myst series that I'm already pretty familiar with. I played them a number of times and had the opportunity to kind of reacquaint myself with those games in preparation for these reviews. But the fourth game in the Myst series, Revelation, is a little different. I only ever played the game once when it first came out back in 2004, and the only way that I've really had to reacquaint myself with the game is by watching a walkthrough online. And while this did serve to remind me of what's in the game and what it was like to play it, it didn't really give me the sense of actually having to puzzle through everything for myself. So for that experience, I'm going by my almost now 14-year-old memory of the game. I actually did consider not doing this review or doing an abbreviated version of this review for that reason, but watching the walkthrough actually did remind me of a lot of the aspects of playing the game and a lot of the things about it that I both did and didn't like, and I do want to talk about those things, so here we go. Myst IV Revelation was designed entirely by Ubisoft, who by this time had bought the franchise from Presto Studios, and the game was intended to finally tie up the loose ends of Cirrus and Achenar's storylines. These are the two brothers that you find imprisoned at the end of the first Myst game, and at the end of that game, you return to Myst to find that both of the linking books that Cirrus and Achenar were trapped in have been destroyed. So you don't really know what happens to them. You don't know if they're just kind of trapped in those books forever now that the books themselves are destroyed, or if Atris actually killed them by burning the books. In Revelation, however, you discover that Cirrus and Achenar are not only still alive, but they have actually been living on these prison ages. Cirrus has been living on an age called Spire, and Achenar on an age called Haven, and they had both been written by Atris specifically to be prisons for greedy travelers. You also find that Atris still has access to these ages and his sons, and he has been trying to reconcile with them and basically determine whether or not they have actually reformed and can be released from their prisons. Atris' wife Catherine believes that they should, but Atris is unsure, and so he calls on you to be an impartial judge on the matter. This game takes place 10 years after Exile and 20 years after the events of Myst and Riven. Yisha, Atris and Catherine's infant daughter from Exile, is now a precocious 10-year-old who is just starting to learn how to write ages for herself. And it is indicated at the beginning of this game that this is not your first visit to Atris and his family since Exile, that you have been a frequent guest in their home. When you first arrive, Atris tries to use the Crystal Imaging Viewer, which is a device that was retconned into the world by real Myst along with the Age of Rhyme. The device gives Atris the ability to look into ages without linking there, and he is using it to look after Cirrus and Achenar in their prison ages. However, something goes wrong with the viewer. Atris has to visit Rhyme in order to get the parts that he needs to fix it, and while he's gone, all hell breaks loose. Cirrus and Achenar somehow escape their prison ages and kidnap Yisha, and now it is up to you to go save her because Atris is trapped on Rhyme and doesn't even know what's happened. Now, I have very mixed feelings about this game for a number of reasons, but let's start with the stuff that I do actually like. Pretty much everything that they do to immerse you in the world is spot on. Spire is a bizarre world of floating rocks, exploding crystals, and electric power, an age that obviously operates on a different set of rules for physics. Haven, in contrast, is a wilderness with a number of wild animals, a jungle, and an upright shipwreck that was written into the age. Because Atris just loves writing shipwrecks into his ages. I don't know what that's about. Aside from the two prison ages, you also visit the Age of Serenia. Here there exists a civilization that is focused around the spirituality of memories and dreams. Now, the mechanics of how these ages work doesn't always make a whole lot of sense, as we'll discuss in a little bit, but the actual visual style, the actual artwork of these ages is incredible to look at. They're probably the most beautiful and creative ages that have ever been created for a Myst game. The music is also an excellent element. We haven't talked much about music in these reviews. Actually, we haven't talked about it at all. For the first two games, the music was written by Robin Miller, and he took kind of an atmospheric approach to the composing, writing pieces that almost kind of blended in with the world and didn't really stand out as musical accompaniment. Jack Wall took over the composition for Exile and Revelation, and he took a little bit more of a literal approach to the composing and added a few more melodic passages in, but he still maintained a basically atmospheric feel. And for Revelation, he actually used quotations from Cirrus and Akinar's themes from the Myst music. The game is still point and click with pre-rendered graphics, but the visuals have improved yet again. You still have 360-degree visibility, and the live videos of the actors and the characters are integrated much better into the visuals, making it feel more and more as if they're actually there. In addition, in this game, you are actually given some items to help you along the way. First, you have a journal where you can actually keep notes on what's happening in-game rather than trying to find a scrap piece of paper and hurriedly write things down. You also have a camera, so you're able to take pictures of important things you need to refer back to later rather than having to rely on computer screenshots. And during the game, you also come across a necklace, which is worn by Yisha, and the necklace has this ability to basically let you view flashbacks. It's able to tap into strong memories that are associated with certain locations, and so when the necklace glows, it can actually allow you to see those memories. It can allow you to view things that happened in the past. The necklace also allows you to have journals read to you rather than having to read them yourself. And speaking of journals, this gets into one of the more iffy aspects of the game for me. All of the games contain a certain amount of backstory. In fact, much of the fun of the game is discovering that backstory as you play. And all of the games contain journals which help to give you some of that backstory. In Myst, there were 4 journals, 5 if you play real Myst, for each of the ages that you visit in the game. In Riven, there are also 4, 1 for Atris, 1 for Catherine, and 2 for Gen, which give you a little bit more backstory. And of course, in Exile, in addition to Atris's journal, which gives you the background of the ages that you're visiting, you also find Saavedra's journal piece by piece as you play through the game. By and large, these journals basically just exist to deepen our understanding of the story, the world, and the characters. Often they contain some sort of code or some sort of bit of information that you need to solve a puzzle, which you can usually find pretty easily just by flipping through them, so it's not wholly necessary to read every word of every journal. And like I said, the most journals we've ever seen in a Myst game is about 4 or 5, depending on which version of Myst you play. In Revelation, there are 11. 4 for Atris, 3 for Akinar, 2 for Cirrus, 1 for Catherine, and 1 for Yisha. And that doesn't even count the flashbacks that you get from the necklace, which act as kind of a journal in and of themselves. And it's honestly a little ridiculous. You get to a certain point of the game and you're just like, really? Another journal? It's almost like a parody of a Myst game. And the thing is, most of this game hinges on you finding out exactly what happened with Cirrus and Akinar and what their overall plan is. And to do that, you kind of have to read the journals. I mean, yeah, in this game you can have them read to you, sure, but it's still a lot of backstory, and it almost feels like this game maybe would have worked a little better as a novel. And partly as a result of this, the puzzles in this game aren't really terrific either. I think because so much focus was put on the backstory and everything that happened in the intervening 10 or 20 years, they didn't put as much thought into the puzzles, and they're not as well integrated into the game as they have been in previous Myst games. Not all of them. In fact, I think the puzzles on Haven are actually pretty good. I think Haven is by far the best age in this game. But Spires are only okay, and Serenias almost seem arbitrary at times, especially when you go into the dream world. We'll talk more about that in a minute. One of the fun things about playing these games is that the puzzles don't distract from the experience. They feel like they're supposed to be a part of the world. You can clearly see how all the different parts fit together, and that's just not always the case with Revelation. They just don't seem as cleverly conceived, and they constantly remind you that you are, in fact, playing a game. Another element that often takes me out of the experience is the characterization. Aside from Yisha, we're basically encountering characters that we've already encountered. Cirrus, Akinar, Atris, and Catherine. Atris is still fine, largely because we don't see a whole lot of him, and he's still being portrayed by Rand Miller, who portrayed him in the other 3 games as well. And of course, Yisha we're only just now starting to get to know. The kid's acting is a little stilted, but it's a child actor, we can forgive that. Cirrus is okay too. His acting is a little bit over-the-top villain to really be believable, but that's still pretty consistent with the Cirrus that we met in the original Myst. Akinar, though, is completely different. In Myst, he's half-crazed and hysterical, basically just a grinning lunatic. We see hints of that in Revelation, but the character seems, on the whole, a lot more grounded than the crazy killer that we saw in Myst. Also, the voice and mannerisms are just completely different. I do like the overall arc of the character, although the acting is still a little bit hokey for my taste. And if I were to take this game on its own without considering the Myst game that came before, it would probably be basically fine. I'm also not crazy about the language that the characters use. Again, Atris is fine and Cirrus is fine, but for whatever reason, Akinar and Yisha make use of what sounds like a more modern-sounding English. All of the characters up until this point have basically spoken in a very lofty manner, indicating that they are, in fact, a part of another world. Saavedro didn't. Saavedro basically talked like Brad Dourif, but Saavedro was from another age entirely, and so that could be understood. But in this game, we hear both Yisha and Akinar using modern colloquialisms, which really serves to take you out of the action. My real issue, though, characterization-wise, is with Catherine. We meet Catherine in the first Myst book, Myst the Book of Atris, and we meet her again in Riven, and she is portrayed as a strong woman, a freedom fighter, someone who is fiercely loyal to her family and to her people and will do whatever it takes to free her people from the hold that Gen has on them. She's also deeply thoughtful and intelligent, someone who taught herself her own version of age writing, which even surpasses what Atris can do. Now, in Revelation, we don't actually ever see her. We only hear her voice in her journal and in the various flashbacks. But in this game, she's portrayed as a hand-wringing mother, a nagging wife, and a naive sentimentalist who doesn't truly understand what's going on. She also sounds vaguely like an uppity British woman. Akinar's differences can just be written off as different acting choices, and it doesn't really contradict things that we saw in the first Myst, but Catherine's characterization is just deeply irritating to me. Serenia is another iffy aspect of the game for me. It's briefly mentioned that Serenia was written by Catherine, and if you have been following the story thus far, then you know that Catherine writes ages differently from Atris. She bends the rules of age writing so that the ages seem impossible and dreamlike, but in the end they do actually make a logical sense. And so it does make sense that Serenia would have a heavy reliance on spirituality and mysticism. Overall, I'm not bothered by this, but I can understand why some people are. The fact that this is Catherine's age is really only mentioned briefly, and you would only understand why that's significant if you had been following every aspect of this story. But easily my least favorite aspect of the entire game is the dream world. This is described as a mirror age to Serenia, and it's a place that you visit twice in the course of the game. It involves my least favorite puzzles in the entire franchise, but more than that, it's the one aspect of the game that is never explained. The thing about the magic of Myst is that it is very grounded. Obviously, you can write links to other worlds and visit there by putting your hand on a book, and that's obviously magical, but that's about as far as the fantasy goes. The rest of the world is very much grounded in science and physics, and even things that seem fantastical are usually just a matter of physics working differently by a different set of rules, as is the case with Spire. You almost always get to see the way things work in this game. The machinery of it all is generally pretty well explained. And that's true of a lot of Serenia. I can get next to a lot of the aspects of Serenia. A lot of them are explained in some way, and even parts of it that aren't still act as kind of a bridge between the first three Myst games and what we see in Myst V and in Uru. Dream, however, with its spirit guide and its replacement of memories is just a step too far, at least for me. It's not a big part of the game, but it is kind of the climax of the game, and I wish that they had grounded it a little bit more. Overall, my biggest issue with this game, though, is what it does with the Myst continuity. To me, this game was so close to being a good Myst game. And while I do appreciate the opportunity to look more closely at Cirrus and Akinar and their relationship with Atris and all of that storyline, the story just doesn't fit with the rest of the games. We learn about prison books in Riven. They are books where when you go to link to them, you are trapped eternally in the link. Not on another world, but actually within the oblivion of the link itself. That's what happens to Gen when he goes into the book. And it's consistent with what we witnessed with Cirrus and Akinar, and to suddenly learn that no, those weren't prison books, those were prison ages all along, is incredibly jarring, and it doesn't mesh with what we saw on Myst. The best explanation that anyone has provided for this continuity gaffe is that the game designers for Myst didn't show us every aspect of the world. They sacrificed certain parts of Myst and certain parts of what you would have seen had it been real for the sake of playability. And I can almost accept that, but it still just doesn't quite jive for me. The fact is that those books simply acted more like prison books of the kind that we trapped Gen in than they acted like prison ages. And that's hard to explain away, and I'm generally pretty good at explaining away continuity gaffes. I mean, look at the world we live in. But with this game, I can't do it. I can't overlook that gaffe. Maybe if I liked the game itself a little bit better, I could explain it away or at least ignore it, but to me, this game is only okay. It looks fantastic, and it does further the story a little bit, and like I said, Haven is easily the best part of this game by far. But for me, it just needed a little bit more thought put into the story and into the puzzles to really work, and on the worth meter, I would give this one a worth watching a friend play. What is it you have against the ring, Arcana? Do you not care for the knowledge it imparts? It's not knowledge that the ring provides. No, you're right, it's not. It's better. It's truth. A truth, perhaps, that you don't wish to acknowledge. The ring is a poison, and you know it. No one person should know what it knows. And yet it's only by knowing what it knows that you'll be able to solve your dilemma. You know what your problem is, Arcana? You still believe in the trifecta. You still believe that a powerful wizard can have all three things: power, knowledge, and goodness. That's a fairy tale, Arcana. Way I figure it, you can have two of the three. You can be powerful and good, but ignorant, like you were when you first started to grasp your power. Or you can be knowledgeable and good, but have no power, like you right now. Oh, you have the capacity for power, true enough, but you don't use it. You don't use your power to its fullest potential. You still think magic is just a scholarly pursuit. What was it you kept saying in the Stephen King universe? That you couldn't use your magic or else you'd be detected. Alright, so they detect you. So what? With all the power you have, do you really think that you couldn't stand up to Haberdasher and Prime and that Ex Machina guy? You weren't afraid of being detected because you thought you might get caught. You were afraid of being detected because it meant you might actually have to do something. Have to fight, maybe even sacrifice something, and you couldn't do it, Arcana. Because the truth that ring has been whispering in your ear for 6 years is that you're a coward. The third option, power and knowledge, but not necessarily goodness. That is the only true path, Arcana. It's the only way to solve your dilemma. Can it corrupt you? Of course it can. But is that a risk?